So, Kerry is a graduate of NYU's Gallatin School of Individualized Study, where she studied speech pathology, theatre, and sociolinguistics. Throughout her degree, she produced shows and workshops with Gallatin Theatre Troupe, as well as helping to develop original work at Manhattan Repertory Theatre, at the New York International Fringe Festival, and at Dixon Place. She worked as the digital assistant for Academy Award-winning costume designer Anne Roth on the film The Post, directed by Steven Spielberg, and on the Broadway production of The Prom, as well as the recent revivals of Carousel, Three Tall Women, and The Iceman Cometh. At Lincoln-Centered Theatre, she works alongside dramaturg Anne Cattaneo, helping to run the Directors Lab. Alongside this, she continues to work as a freelance voice and dialect coach across the New York theatre scene, and she's also worked extremely hard as one of the head house managers at the Off Broadway powerhouse that is New York Theatre Workshop. And before lockdown went into effect, as the house seat and guest services coordinator for Moulin Rouge the musical at the Al Hirschfeld Theatre on Broadway. She is an electric force in every room, and her rom-com reviews are the highlight of my Instagram feed. Thanks so much for chatting with me, Kerry Candeloro.
Of course, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the rom-com plug.
So I wanted to start off with, I suppose, your development as a multidisciplinary kind of theatre person and how that sort of seems to have originated at Gallatin. How did your studies there influence the way that you work now and your approach to your career?
I really don't think I would be where I am today if I didn't go to Gallatin. I was interested in going into college and studying theater. I'd done intensives and camps my whole life, and then when it came time to finding a program, I learned really early on that I wasn't interested in conservatory style. That just wasn't something that was interesting to me, because what I loved about theater was the connection that people have and the feeling of family that you get on stage, and just the ability to create something bigger than yourself and kind of all bring your different walks of life and merge them and create something that's greater than some of its parts. So I was looking at a program that would allow me to do that and also allow me to get into this thing that I was just kind of learning that I was interested in, which was speech pathology and vocal coaching. I was a big fan of The King's Speech when it came out, and that movie was oh, this is a thing I want to do in my life. And so what I loved about Gallatin is when we did these productions together, and we would come together and as a troupe and create these original plays, we would all bring in our different specialities. And it wasn't like we were ever competing against one another. It was something that we all had something different to bring to the table, but we all also had this thing that connected us, which was theater. So for me, I liked the idea of taking something that is totally just separate from the arts in theory, which is speech work, speech pathology, but then bringing it together with something that is arts related. And I loved that meld of things. And I think that's what's led me to where I am today in terms of the work that I do, because all of the many jobs that you listed off all have to do with personal development and interpersonal connections, and that's something that I've always been really drawn to. So I'm happy that I can take that side of me and merge it with the art side.
So you touched a little bit on what then brought you to voice and dialect coaching. How does speech pathology fit into that then? Because I suppose in dialect, there's a huge cultural element to it. How does that relate to the anatomical side of speech pathology, and how much did you study each of those?
I figured out early on that I wasn't really into the medical side of things. I would never consider myself a doctor by any means, and I was not ready for the pressure of taking care of people's lives. So I found out that there was this other course that I could go into, which was linguistics, that I can kind of, sneak my way into that and pretend I'm a linguistics major when I'm actually a voice and dialect person at Gallatin, and learn the things I need to learn and then apply that to my work. So I think anatomically it's good to know for me as the voice person, because if I'm a client, I can say, okay, see how your tongue moves up like this when you say this? If you move it down slightly, you'll actually get the sound that we're looking for in this dialect. But I find that sometimes it's hard for me to explain that to someone who maybe doesn't have the training that you would get at a certain conservatory. So especially as a dialect coach and voice coach, I talk about IPA students versus EAR students. So IPA is International Phonetic Alphabet. Anyone who goes to a drama school as an actor will have learned it and probably had it tattooed on their body in some way, shape, or form, just from how much the teachers will instill it into you. And so these IPA students have a sense of the anatomy and of the alphabet. So I can say, hey, do a schwa or do a unvoiced fricative or whatever, and know what I'm saying. But you're not always going to meet people like that, and it's not a requirement of the industry to know that. So I also want to be able to say, hey, to my EAR students here, who basically learn by hearing, I say, okay, see that sound, see that if you go like you'll be able to get this French sound. So it was good for me to have the understanding of speech pathology and linguistics and anatomy that I did have, so that I can bring that to my students. But then I also was able to take what I learned from these other courses and these other departments and make it a little bit more manageable for people who aren't as strictly involved in the anatomy side of things.
Directors Lab really intrigued me. It's Lincoln Center Theatre's developmental program for stage directors. You get around 70 directors every year from around the States and around the world. And I'm wondering, as someone that facilitates that and helps plan that, but isn't herself a director, what kind of things have you gotten from working on that, and does that give you an opportunity to kind of reflect on your own practice?
Just on a basic level, I've met directors from anywhere from Oklahoma City to Ethiopia to Kosovo to Macedonia to Kuwait, and just that understanding of how directing is different in all these different countries and cultures has been eye-opening in general. I mean, from how we met when I worked in London, that was a huge change for me. And then now getting to hear about other people's experiences in other parts of the world, especially not the Western side of the world, has been really fascinating to see, especially to see what things what things have really made the jump and what things haven't. So Anne likes to talk about how when we introduce a topic, we'll say Auguste de Beauvoir. You'll have a third of the people in the room love that thing and know everything about it. A third of people in the room hate that thing and everything about it. And the other third just doesn't know anything about it. And so it's interesting to kind of see what is the thing, what is the vibe in the room at the time, what is the thing that's interesting to these directors. And it helps me just kind of know where the industry is going, what people are really into. I mean, last year we didn't have a lab this year because of COVID, I can't imagine doing visas right now. Oh my gosh, it gives me anxiety. But last year, for the first time, we had a group of directors who came to us and said that they were really interested in intimacy direction. So they led a whole session on what that involves. And that's something that was new to, it's fairly new in the industry. It's something that's kind of bubbling up and becoming a thing that is going to be implemented more often. But it was something that we had never talked about in the lab before. And so it was great for me to kind of understand that these are directors who are interested in that. How do we make that happen? How do we give them the space? How do we give them the materials? How do we help them develop these things? I know for me, just getting to hear these directors talk about what they're interested in and what drives them and what motivates them, and just having them all talk together. I mean, alone, just having multiple directors in a room is groundbreaking.
Yeah,
the director,
it's such a rare thing.
It is. The director is often the loneliest person in the room. They are by themselves. There's no one to talk to. And whereas here, it's here's 3 weeks. You're going to sit in a basement and just talk to each other and read plays and experience things and just have that time. And that's been the most, I know for me, talking to these directors for over the past couple of years that I worked on it, that's the most valuable thing for them, is just the idea of just having more people to talk to. We've had multiple designers come in, so we have little mini designer lab sessions. We had years where we had a couple new playwrights come in and they workshop the works with the directors. And so I think collaboration is really key, and especially, I mean, we're learning right now in COVID how isolating it can be. And so collaboration is something that's going to be really helpful when we get back into the world, because we can all share our experiences together and share what we're all going through and create art out of that.
When we talk about institutional change in theatre, I often find it difficult because of the discourse around the freelance workforce and the precarious nature of it, which leads to people feeling that they are powerless, and also the oversaturation of I suppose the market with people who are desperate to work and who are just want to get on stage. I want to use all this to talk about ableism in theatre, about which you're a very outspoken advocate as a disabled woman yourself. What do you think, big question, what do you think is the best way to demand action from these arts organisations that are continuing to fail their disabled artists and audience members?
Big question. I think a lot of it is letting people know that there's an issue and that there's a problem with it. And it's weird because I think about how many times something has happened and people are like, oh, I didn't know that was a problem, or like, I didn't realize that was such a big problem. You know, I think about theaters that I've worked in that haven't had accessible bathrooms for audience members. And so an audience member comes to see the show and they're like, well, where do I go to the bathroom? And it's something where the more that it's brought up and the more that it's talked about and the more that there's pressure put on the organization to do something, that something will happen. I mean, I can speak for a lot of experiences, especially working as a freelance artist in a lot of these theaters in New York that are commissioned, kind of like you know, are they're not subscription-based theaters. They're theaters that kind of do one-off shows, and they have people pay to rent it, or rental theaters or rental spaces that are in this little loft area in the Lower East Side that have like 5 flights of stairs to go up, and people can't access that space. And it's difficult when there's an organization like that where there's not a lot of leeway in terms of power, instead of say like, hey, like, we won't work here until we do this. But I know for me, it's been something that's, as someone who's been kind of brought up in New York in the Off Broadway kind of non-for-profit organizational world of things, I've had a lot of experiences working in those places. It's something that it's so helpful when the employees can take the salaried, like administrative employees, can listen to the audience members and the members who are paying money, the actors who are in the space, and everyone talks about the same problem. And it's the more that it is brought to the forefront and the more that it is spoken about candidly, not just saying like, oh, there's no stairs, but like the more that there are specific examples of issues like this, you know, where you have actors who need to be carried upstairs, you have audience members who are calling ahead of time who are saying, I can't go up these stairs, so I can't buy a ticket to your show. More, or you have someone who's an incredibly qualified intern, prospective intern, who says like, I use a mobility device, can I get into your theater? And you say no. The more that these specific examples are brought up to the people in power, more that they know about these things happening, the more likely there's going to be change. It's a lot about communication and collaboration, you know, people working together, because it's hard to listen to just one person talking about it and listen to them. But when you get a whole bunch of people from all different avenues in the arts coming together and talking about this as a problem, that's something that's going to change. That's been one of the really wonderful things that's happening right now in the theater community in terms of race. There's the Broadway Black Lives Matter movement that's happening, and you have people who are actors, producers, you have film stars, you have all the people coming together saying that this is a real issue, how do we fix this? And there's been such wonderful work in terms of getting the organizations to actually do something about it and to pledge things, because now we all have the time to pledge things because we didn't have the time for it before. So now it's like, okay, we got to do this shit. We got to get this shit done. I have so much hope in what they're doing in terms of race. And so I also then have hope that this is one day going to happen for the disabled community as well.
How do you feel about then sort of having to constantly explain your experiences? Is there not a frustration in the fact that it seems like you're not being listened to?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, it is exhausting. And it's frustrating when, especially you say things over and over again, or like when you say, I need something because of whatever reason, and someone doesn't believe you, or the fear to, like, especially for me as a disabled person with, you know, limb difference and then also a chronic illness, to say like, I need this thing and it will help me. and someone is like, well, then are you unable to do your job? Like, that's the fear that you always have, is speaking up. But for a lot of people, it's taken, and it's a shame, but this kind of the human nature way that for a lot of people, it takes these personal stories in order to convince them that there's a problem and to propel them into change. It takes it connecting not just in like, because you can talk about systemic racism and systemic problems all you want, but for a lot of people, it won't connect with them until they have like a name and a face and a story. And so it's frustrating for people like me to constantly be like, here's my story, but I'm also glad to share it because I know, at least from in my perspective, that I know that it will cause someone to rethink something or to make some kind of change. Yeah. So I take a lot of self-care breaks after I do these long explanations of things. I watch rom-coms, I read books or listen to music just to kind of keep my headspace open. But until we're at a place where it's commonplace to, do your own research and read things on your own and seek out this material on your own without having that personal connection, it's become for me an incredibly important job to kind of throw the first stone into the lake, if you will, and create the ripple effect for a lot of people.
I also want to touch on inspiration porn, which is a kind of objectification of disabled people, is open conversation and dialogue and discussion of the ways that sort of discourse is really damaging. Is that the way forward?
I think it's something that, because any kind of change that happens in an industry, it has to happen in society as well. I was talking to people about how, I'll go back to the theater world, if you want to create change, if you want to create a whole new kind of office culture, that's great for a theater, like internally. But then once the audience comes in and the paying customers come in and the donors come in, that could totally change. I've seen a lot of organizations have these great, messages and mission statements and prospects of all these great things that they do. And then these other things happen because people who are outside the organization have influence. And so back to your original question and not my tangent, it's something where I know for me, the one way that I've been trying to get at least my little group of followers on my social media and my friends in person to understand more specifically what the problems are with inspiration porn, to be like in the most basic level, is just to follow more disabled people on social media. Like, understand that that we are real people. We are not just, existing in this one little 30-second TikTok video you see, and that it's harmful to us. It's a lot about diversifying your feed. That's a huge buzzword right now. A huge buzz phrase is diversify your feed, see more people, because when you can see a person and recognize that they exist outside that video, you can see that, one-handed girl you saw buttoning up her shirt also lifting weights. You see that there's a person that exists outside there, and it's a shame that it's taken our society this long to really see disabled people as people. I think about the revolution that came about with the disuse of the R word and how that's only really come into its own in the past decade, I guess. And it's kind of these small steps that have to happen for that our society is like, okay, this is actually exploitation. This is blatant exploitation, that we're taking somebody's average everyday life and turning it into a viral video. Had that video of that kid buttoning their shirt, had that been a person with 2 arms and 2 hands, would you have given it this applause? If someone who has 2 legs is able to walk upstairs, would you still give it the same amount of praise as you would? Because now you're not seeing that person as a human being, you're seeing that person as a symbol, a meme almost, of all my problems don't matter because that person can do it too. And it's no, this person is just living their life. So it's not, I often feel like inspiration porn sometimes in real life. I've had experiences where I'm working front of house in a theater or working on Broadway, off Broadway, in a random space in the Lower East Side, anywhere. And I'll be doing my job, which is like walking around, maintaining order, being nice and things. And someone will come up to me or grab me and be like, "You're so inspirational." And I'm like, "Not really. I'm hungry, actually." But like,
right now, I'm just telling this
like,
audience member where to go.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm literally just going, go there or do that or don't do that. Like, it's not, or like me handing out tickets is not your inspiration porn. Me telling you how to like change your voice to sound a certain way is not inspiration porn. If I climb a mountain, cool. That's something a lot of able-bodied people can't do. So cool. Give me praise for that. I mentioned in a lot of times on social media that Cody Lee video, that boy who won America's Got Talent, who has this amazing voice, but also has a range of disabilities. And so people are like, "Oh, but he couldn't even see the piano." And it's like, well, that's not something to really talk about in this case. It's talk about, let's praise him for the beautiful voice that he has, not the way that he gets up on stage in a cane. That's just, it's two totally different things. And it's things like that that frustrate me, because I know from personal experience, like, there are able-bodied people in my past and in my life who like put me up on pedestals for things that I didn't deserve to be on pedestals for. And being young, I didn't really grasp what that meant. So I had this whole like belief of like, I had to be this inspirational figure. This was my calling in life, was to inspire. And looking back on it now, I'm like, that's such a fucked up way to think of things. Instead of thinking of myself as a human, thinking that my purpose in life was to be someone else's, trophy on a pedestal, is a really messed up way to think about yourself.
It's been really strange watching the transatlantic approach to support for the arts throughout this time. I wonder what you think. What's your experience of this whole time been, particularly as someone who's been furloughed?
I've had a lot of other jobs on like where I've, run around with various costumes and emails and whatnot on Broadway. But this is kind of like my first like getting into like the nitty gritty, like being involved with like all the people involved in the show, from the front to the back to the left to the right. And so it's definitely been a change for me as somebody who's spent a lot of time in the off-Broadway non-for-profit world, where like, members and money is everything in there. And money is everything on Broadway too, but in a different way. And so I think both have its pros and cons and ups and downs in terms of what the future, challenges they have to navigating the future of theater in this way. I'm an extrovert. I'm a hopeful person. So I hope, and I'm already seeing from a lot of things that are happening on social media and with a lot of these readings that I've been a part of and a lot of these talks that I've done, that people are taking the time now to really delve into these things and change our community and try to change it for the better and create some kind of new world. I think about, oh God, I can't remember who said it, but someone was talking about how Broadway is nicknamed the Great White Way and how that's kind of messed up. So why don't we call it the Great Bright Way? And it's like, oh, that's a cool, wonderful change. That's pretty easy to make. And so we never like had the mental space for it before, because we were all dealing with Excel spreadsheets and who's injured this week. But now we're like, oh, that's an easy thing to do that affects a lot of people in a way that we didn't really understand, and now we can change that. That's something super easy. In terms of accessibility, I think about how, it's a shame. We have a lot of these theaters that are in the States, at least. I think about these buildings that are designated like historical buildings, where you can't make changes to them because they're historical and they preserve the integrity of the architecture and things. But because we have these historical buildings, we don't have the ability to create access. I've been backstage in a lot of Broadway theaters and theaters downtown and uptown and all over the place. And I can only think of maybe a handful I can count on my left hand that are like actually accessible backstage. All these theaters are accessible for the audience members. There's accessible seating, there's elevators, there's listing devices. There are all these things that we do to make sure that people can get into the theater who are paying money. But what about people who want to get backstage, who want to be tech people, who want to be an actor, who want to, work in any capacity behind the stage, not just in the house. And so I would hope that with everything going on with accessibility right now in terms of digital theater and online theater, that we're starting to break down these barriers, or at least create new options. I mean, ideal world, by the time we get back in March, all these backstages will have elevators and ramps and stuff, but that's not a realistic reality. But what it's doing is it's giving us a chance to talk about what the problems are and create online work and help us collaborate in ways that, don't involve these barriers, these physical barriers for people who get backstage. I mean, in terms of digital creation for theater right now, if you take people of the world, if you take nothing away from this interview except this, it's if you do digital theater, if you do anything online, caption your videos. Captioning is huge. That is a simple, easy way to provide access. You just caption what you're doing. Alt caption on Instagram, captioning your videos, or doing some kind of live narration or something. Just captioning is great. And I think that if we're in this world now where we're doing things digitally and being a part of these readings and doing all these things that we could do, we need to take more steps to make sure people can experience them. And I think, and it's a shame that this is the case, but a lot of us have to talk about it, of like, because for instance, I got to watch a reading that the Queen's Theater did. Queen's Theater has a program within it called Theater for All, which is an initiative that really strives to get people with disabilities involved in kind of every side and every aspect of theater. And so a part of that reading was, hey, here's they did it on Facebook Live and did it on Zoom, 2 different platforms. And then they said, Facebook Live, if you're watching it, great, but don't use the chat unless you are asking us for something in terms of like, if you need a caption retyped out, or if something's not working with the audio description or something isn't working, like use the chat for accessibility purposes. And that was great because it took all away the filter, it took all of the, hubbub aside and said, okay, if you need access, this is your path to do it. And it's a shame that more places don't do that that's not just commonplace. I think about how it is in fact a privilege to have a laptop, to have great Wi-Fi, to have earbuds, to have all these things. And obviously it's something that I try to keep in my mind to stay as, grounded as I can in the reality of those things. But so that's something in itself. I think a lot about my directors who are in various parts of the world who can only email us once every couple of weeks when they get to an internet cafe. And that's something that like, that's a privilege I take for granted. I have my phone with me at all times. I'm always attached to the computer or just some internet way. And if I'm not, I go crazy. But I always have to be in the mindset of how do we get theater to the masses? I mean, the Hamilton broadcast in and of itself was revolutionary in terms of, that was a revolution. It was a revolution in the way that it brought theater to people. And I mean, I'm sure this working in the UK versus in the US, but the US has been very staunchly against broadcasting theater because of a fear that it would cause like drops in revenue and would just hurt people from seeing the show in person. But I mean, I don't think Hamilton's going to close during the pandemic. I don't think Hamilton's going to lose people going to the show just because they saw it on Disney Plus. And I think it's taken to a point where we are going to go probably about a year without theater to get US producers to actually start thinking about how do we bring these shows to other people who can't access it for even like, for disability needs or not, they just can't access it for whatever reason. And, now we have the Diana show coming onto Netflix. We have more readings happening online. We have a lot more broadcasting of old shows. And then Lincoln Center has done a lot of broadcasting on PBS. I know the public has as well, great performances, and it's taken this. And so what I hope is that when we all eventually get out of our houses and when this period of our lives is over, that we take the lessons that we've learned and we don't just throw them away. That we say, yes, working from home is a thing you can do and do it well. And having health insurance is a huge thing that you need to have. That all of the wonderful things, because there's been a lot of really wonderful things that have happened in terms of accessibility. I think about Imani Barbarin, Crutches and Spice on Instagram and on Twitter is an amazing, amazing advocate for all this stuff. And she's talking about how, you know, we're learning these things now. These things just became like, oh, you're working from home as like an easy 1-2 thing. But disabled people have been fighting for decades trying to work from home. And we're told that it wasn't possible or whatever wasn't an option. And now it's the only option. So what's going to happen when we finally get out of our houses? Is that all going to change? Or are we going to keep those things in mind?
Is there anything that you would like to recommend to our followers? Anything that you've been watching, reading?
First and foremost, I tell this to everyone I meet now, Crip Camp on Netflix is an amazing documentary about the passing of the American Disabilities Act and the 504 movement. And if you haven't heard of Judy Heumann, you're going to watch this documentary and learn all about her. She's amazing. So Crip Camp on Netflix is number 1. Follow me on Instagram, Kerry_can. Sometimes I try to repost a lot of things that other disabled creators do so that people can just kind of hear about them. And also on Mondays, I review rom-coms in my free time. So I do, so follow that. Imani Barbarin, Crutches and Spice, an amazing, amazing, wonderful activist, active on both Instagram and Twitter. And, oh gosh, caption your videos.
Caption your videos. Thanks for chatting with me, Kerry. Thank you for this amazing transatlantic discussion. Yeah.